Hey Optimancers, Tree and Monk here. Today I want to talk about a spell that I've been meaning to talk about for a long time, and that's the Magic Jar spell. The Magic Jar spell is maybe the most complicated spell in the entire game. I talked about Fog Cloud a few weeks ago, and that is of course a complicated spell because of the way that obscurement works in the game, but Magic Jar, just from the beginning to the end, is certainly just more complicated than any other spell that I'm aware of. Now, the Magic Jar spell is a 6th level spell, and it is available only for wizards. Of course, you could always take it with your bards with magical secrets, or if you have a rogue thief in your party, they might be able to cast it off a scroll. But for normal selection, it's just the wizard. It's a 6th level spell, which means you're looking at least being 11th level by the time you can cast it. So let's start with how the spell is cast in the first place. So the first thing you're going to need is a container, and that container can be a gem, a crystal, or a reliquary. But it must be valued at least 500 gold pieces. So you take your container, and then you're going to begin casting the spell. And you will generally be casting the spell sometime when you're not in combat. This is not a spell you would cast during a combat or in a dangerous situation. It's going to take you a minute to cast the spell. So once you cast the spell, then your body is immediately going to fall into a catatonic state. So your soul enters the container, and your body is now empty. Now, once you're inside the container, you're aware of your surroundings, just like it was you in that container space. But you are unable to move or use reactions. And there's only one action you can take, and the action is to try to possess someone. So once you're in the container, you can stay there forever. There is nothing preventing you from just staying in that container indefinitely. So this is something a DM can use and have a wizard from ages gone by cast a Magic Jar spell, and then they're sitting in this Magic Jar just waiting for someone to come along. Now, if you use it as a PC, again, yeah, you are in that container as long as you want to be, or until it is dispelled or destroyed. If the spell is dispelled or destroyed, then the spell immediately ends. But as long as you're within that container, you have the ability to take only one action, and that action is to try to possess someone. You can do this over and over again. You can possess anyone up to 100 feet from the container that's a humanoid. Now, the only limitation is you must be able to see them, and then they can't be protected by anything like a protection from evil and good spell or a magic circle spell, for example. Now, I would assume as well, though it doesn't say specifically under the spell, but because the effect is coming from the container, I would assume that total cover from, say, a wall of force, for example, would also block the attempt, though that isn't specified in the spell, but that would be my interpretation of it. So when you attempt to possess somebody, they make a charisma saving throw. And charisma is actually one of the weaker saves out there. There are a lot of powerful creatures that aren't even proficient in charisma saving throws. So then you can have charisma saving throws that are actually quite low, and they're going against your spell DC. So you have a lot of creatures out there that are powerful that will also probably fail their saving throw when they are hit with a Magic Jar. Now, if they make their save, then you cannot try again on that same person for 24 hours. You can, however, continue to use actions on following turns to try to possess other humanoids that are applicable for the spell so that you can see them in there within 100 feet. Now, if they fail their saving throw, what happens is your soul moves into their body and their soul becomes trapped in the container. So now they're in the gem or the reliquary or the crystal, and you're in that humanoid's body. How long are you in that humanoid's body? Until the spell ends, and the spell is only ended if it is dispelled or certain things happen. So again, this could be a very long possession. If you possess something like an elf, you could technically have hundreds and hundreds of years possessing that creature, and unless you're targeted with the dispel magic or the body dies, the ability will just last and last and last, and there's no concentration involved. So once you possess their body, you control it. Remember, their soul is gone. Your soul is the one controlling the body completely. And your game statistics are replaced with the statistics of the creature, but you keep your intelligence, wisdom, and charisma scores. And then this is an important part. You retain the benefit of your own class features. If the target has any class levels, you can't use any of its class features. So when you take over another humanoid, let's say you take over a kobold, that kobold just became an 11 plus level wizard. Well, what about that possessed creature soul? Well, it's stuck in the container. Now, it can view out from the container just as you could. So it can see what's going on and it can hear what's going on, but it can't take actions at all. So it can't try to possess anyone. It's basically just trapped in that container. And again, it could be trapped in that container for a long, long time. So now, while you're possessing the body, at any time, you can choose to go back to the container as long as it's within 100 feet of you. And if you do that, then the creature's soul returns to its body. So this requires you one action, and then you can do it at any time. So you can just choose to end the spell if there's a reason why you would want to. So let's say you take this creature and then you get caught in a trap. So now you're in a pit trap and the walls are closing in on you. You could use your action and then return to the gemstone or the crystal or the reliquary, and then that soul is going to return to the host body and be pretty unhappy with its conditions. Now, what you don't want to happen is have the body die while you're in it. That is the worst case scenario for the caster with a magic jar spell. Because if the body dies, you will have to make a charisma saving throw, and if you're a wizard, your charisma saving throw is going to suck. And it's going to be against your own spellcasting DC, so it's going to be a pretty hard saving throw. And if you fail, you die. Now, the spell actually says, and this is one of the parts that is a little bit unclear about this, if the host body dies while you're in it, the creature dies, and you must make a charisma saving throw against your own spellcasting DC. So, the way I read that is if the host body dies while you're in it, the part where it says the creature dies, I assume means the soul trapped in the container. But I am not certain of that. There is certainly the possibility that it might just be redundant. It might be saying if the host body dies, well then it's dead. But I have to say, I think that would be redundant language. So when it says if the host body dies, the creature dies, I believe it means the soul of the creature dies. So if you are, say, possessing that kobold, and the kobold is stuck in the gem, and then the body dies, the kobold body dies, then I believe the soul of that kobold is destroyed as well. That's the way I read it. So if you succeed on that saving throw, then you return to the container if it's within 100 feet of you. So then the spell continues, and you are once again in the container, and you can possess somebody else. But if the container is not within 100 feet of you, again, you die. So you will always want to keep that container within 100 feet of your possessed body. Now, if the container is destroyed, the spell ends. Now, what happens then is if you are currently possessing a creature, your soul immediately returns to your body. And if your body's more than 100 feet away from you, or your body's dead when you attempt to return to it, you die. Now, if another creature's soul is in the container when it's destroyed, so let's say you have that kobold and then the gemstone it's in gets destroyed, then that kobold soul returns to its body if it's alive within 100 feet, and if not, it dies. One way or the other, if you end the spell, the container is destroyed. Now, the final part of this is, if you are in the container, you can return to your body at any time, thus ending the spell. And again, the container would be destroyed. And that's a 500 gold piece container, so it's not something you would do lightly. So that's the mechanics of the spell. So let's talk a little bit about the use of that spell. So if I'm playing a wizard and I cast Magic Jar, it's something I'm doing outside of combat. So maybe we're resting or something like that. That's when I would cast a Magic Jar. Now, what about my body? Because now my body is lifeless. But we will definitely want to bring the body along, because if we're going to continue adventuring, we do not want to leave the body there, because if it's more than 100 feet away from the container, I can no longer repossess it, and if I'm in a creature body and the spell is dispelled, or it ends, or the body dies, and my original body is not within that 100 feet, I'm going to die. So I always want to bring my body along. So how are we going to do that? Well, maybe you have a party member that can carry the body. If you are small sized, for example, you might be not too difficult for another party member to carry. But assuming you're a medium sized caster, it's not really feasible that somebody's going to just carry your body around. So what you probably want to do is, number one, you could do something like a mount, right? So you have a horse and then you put your body over the horse, or you could do something like a Tensor's floating disk, right? Somebody could cast a Tensor's floating disk. You could potentially even cast the Tensor's floating disk before you cast the magic jar, and you would have only an hour for it, but it would give you a reasonable amount of time. I mean, if you're expecting to be doing about an hour of adventuring until your next rest, that might be the entire period of time that you're moving. Or maybe your body will go in a cart or something, but one way or the other, you're going to want to bring your body along. The other thing, of course, you need to bring along is the container itself. And this is where I think probably it's going to make the most sense for your familiar to come in. So you could have your familiar just take that diamond, for example, if that's the container, maybe in its talons, maybe in its beak, or in its mouth if it's a non-bird kind of familiar, and then it can move around you and your container as you need it to. And that could potentially be the method by which you can move that container within 100 feet of humanoids you might want to possess. Now, generally speaking, you are only going to want to use a magic jar if there are applicable targets for it. So I'm not going to be casting magic jar in a dungeon that I know is filled with a bunch of undead, because those undead are not going to be applicable for a magic jar spell. What I'm going to need is to be able to target humanoids. So maybe we're taking on bandits, or maybe it's orcs or something like that. Then I would expect magic jar to come in very handy, because again, you can use it over and over again. Now let's talk a little bit about the mechanics when you use this spell. So here is a kobold. Now with the magic jar spell, you will use the creature statistics, but you'll maintain your own class features. Now the statistics are everything within this box right here. So armor class 12, hit points 5, speed 30 feet, strength 7, dexterity 15, constitution 9, dark vision 60 feet, passive perception 8. Even the languages, common and draconic, would be creature statistics. Technically, your challenge rating would become 1/8. You get sunlight sensitivity, you would get pack tactics, you would get the ability to use a dagger with a +4 to hit for 1d4 +2 damage, or a sling. Those are the creature statistics. But you get your class features as well. And this is one of the parts that's a little confusing, because according to this, you would now have 5 hit points. But if we look at the spell, it says your game statistics are replaced by the statistics of the creature, though you retain your alignment, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma score. You retain the benefit of your own class features. Now, if we are to consider class features, the very first class feature for wizard is hit points. So by the rules as written, you would get your hit points per level for wizard plus your constitution modifier. Now, with a kobold, a constitution modifier has become negative, but nevertheless you get your hit dice in addition to the hit dice of the kobold. Now, one might wonder if that was an oversight, or whether the designers actually intended you to be able to benefit from your own hit points in addition to the hit points of the creature. And there is a sage advice on it, and the sage advice specifically asks, are the hit points and proficiencies of a class features for the purposes of spells like Magic Jar and Shape Change? And what Jeremy Crawford says, in your class's description, any feature under the class features heading is a class feature. So once again, the very first feature under class features for wizard is hit points. So by raw, and apparently by designer intent, you will get your class's hit points per level based on your hit dice and your new constitution modifier, in addition to those of the creature's form in which you took. Now with a kobold, that's not going to be very good. But a kobold isn't the ideal creature to possess with a magic jar spell either. So let's talk a little bit about what kind of creatures are ideal for a magic jar spell. Well, if we look at the creatures from the Monster Manual, Volos, Mordenkainens that are humanoid, there are a lot of very powerful creatures. One that kind of stands out to me is the Githyanki, Supreme Commander. If you were going to be taking on Githyanki, this would be a great time to use a magic jar spell, because there's one thing I notice about all the Githyanki, none of them are proficient in charisma saving throws. So you have a really good chance of being able to use a possession from your magic jar with Githyanki. Now in this case, with a Githyanki Supreme Commander, one thing that would happen is you would get 187 hit points, in addition to your own hit dice, now modified by a +4 Constitution. So you will very likely have well over 200 hit points. You will become proficient in Constitution saving throws. And you will get innate spellcasting, the psionics, because those are not a class feature. So you can take advantage of that. So with a Githyanki Supreme Commander, for example, you can do things like Bigby's Hand, Mass Suggestion, which is a fantastic spell, Plane Shift, and Telekinesis, each once a day, not using a spell slot, using your innate spellcasting. And your innate spellcasting is based on your intelligence score, and your intelligence score will replace that of the Githyanki Supreme Commander. Now, they have an intelligence score of 16, so it's pretty good, but you might very well have higher than that. And then you will get multi-attack with a silver greatsword. You'll be able to do the parry reaction. Now, the one thing you won't get that is on here is the armor class, because the armor class says 18, but it says in brackets that that is based on plate, so as in plate armor. But what it doesn't show anywhere under the creature statistics is proficiency in heavy armor. So you don't get the Githyanki's proficiency in heavy armor, and if you don't have proficiency in heavy armor, then the very first thing that happens when you succeed on using Magic Jar against a creature like this is you're going to be in armor that you're not proficient in. And plate takes a long time to take off. So it is probably something that you would want to do at the earliest opportunity. Now, of course, it's always possible that you will be proficient in plate. Maybe you're multi-classed, or maybe you're a Githyanki yourself, and you took the heavily armored proficiency feat. So it's certainly possible you'll be proficient in plate, but just understand you will not get the Githyanki's proficiency in plate, and if you possess one that is in plate mail, you will now be in armor that you are not proficient in. However, you will be able to use the greatsword, because the greatsword is listed here as an action that the Githyanki can take, and you get that. So this is the statistics you would use when making your greatsword attacks. Now we're going to get into another thing that's a little bit confusing, and that is legendary actions. Because normally, legendary actions are one of those sacred things that you just can never get. In fact, if we look in the monster manual, it says specifically, if a creature assumes the form of a legendary creature, such as through a spell, it doesn't gain that form's legendary actions, layer actions, or regional effects. Now, the thing I note here is it says if you assume the form of a legendary creature, as in you do a polymorph or a true polymorph, then you wouldn't get those abilities. But we're not assuming the form of a Githyanki, we're possessing a Githyanki. So as it's written, as the rules, as they are written, you should be able to get the legendary actions, legendary resistances, layer actions, regional effects, all of it. Now, if I'm your DM, I'm probably not going to let you have it, because you start giving PCs legendary actions, it is going to break the action economy. It's going to slow down play. I highly recommend against it. So if you are a DM, my recommendation to you is, despite the fact that technically speaking the way the rules are written, legendary actions would technically be applicable for use by a PC that is possessing a legendary creature. I don't think that's the intention, and I don't think I would allow it. But I did want to make it clear that the rules is written the way I read them. Technically speaking, legendary actions would not be excluded from creature statistics when you use a Magic Jar spell. Now, one powerful creature that I don't find very good to go after with a Magic Jar spell are Drow, because Drow just tend to all be proficient in those darn charisma saves. And if they're proficient in the charisma saves, your Magic Jar isn't going to work very often. So I probably would not do it with Drow, but if you're doing Githzerai, it's perfectly good. They're not proficient in charisma saving throws. Now, what about those NPC classes that show up in the Monster Manual and Volo's Guide, like the Archdruid Well, they are fantastic targets for a magic jar, if you can, because the thing about the Archdruid is it doesn't have any Druid levels. It's technically not a Druid at all. It's something unique. It's its own thing. For example, an Archdruid doesn't have Wild Shape. An Archdruid has Change Shape. It works differently. If the Archdruid uses Change Shape to take the form of a beast, it can speak in the new form, something Druids can't do. Now, if you are to possess, say, an Archdruid, you're going to be going up against a saving throw of +0. They have an 11 charisma and no proficiency in charisma saving throws. So your magic jar is very likely to work. Then you've taken over a form with 132 base hit points. That's 24 hit dice. And again, remember, you're adding your own hit dice on top of there with a Constitution modifier of +1. And there is simply no question that you get use of the scimitar and you get the change shape twice a day. But let's talk a little bit about spellcasting, because with innate spellcasting, it's obvious. You will definitely get innate spellcasting. But what about regular spellcasting? Do you get that? Because according to the Magic Jar spell, if the target has any class levels, you can't use any of its class features. Now, the word that I think is important here is class. Not if the target has any levels, if it has any class levels. So does the Archdruid have class levels? Well, if we look at the wording, it says the Archdruid is an 18th level spellcaster. Now again, not necessarily a druid, it's just a spellcaster. A spellcaster isn't a class, or it's certainly not a player's handbook class, and it's not defined as a class anywhere within the rules. Now, if we look at the monster manual, what it says is spellcasting. A monster with a spellcasting class feature has a spellcaster level and spell slots. So again, not class level, spellcaster level, which it is used to cast spells of first level and higher. Spellcaster is also used for any cantrips included in the feature. Monster has a list of spells known or prepared from a particular class. The list might also include spells from a feature in that class, such as the Divine Domain feature of the Cleric or the Druid Circle feature of the Druid. The monster is considered a member of that class when attuning to or using a magic item that requires membership in the class or access to the spell list. So, is the Archdruid a Druid? Is the Archmage a Wizard? Well, technically speaking, no. No, they're not. They certainly have features of the Druid or the Wizard, and in certain situations, they're considered members of that class. So this is one of those situations where I think the rules are a bit fuzzy. Do you get all these spells? Can you cast Foresight once a day? Well, the rules aren't 100% clear, but I think if we read them super technically, yes, you would get all of it. Now, once again, as a DM, I'm not sure I would allow that. Because an Archdruid, although it's not technically speaking a Druid, I think it's supposed to emulate a Druid. So I think, again, if we look at intent, then I would say the intention is for the Archdruid to be like a Druid. But it is perfectly reasonable to rule the other way as well. So maybe if you possess an Archdruid, you will get all those spells. Again, there's nothing specifically in the rules that would suggest you wouldn't. So what do we do with Magic Jar? Well, basically what you're going to do is you're going to have your body along, you're going to have the gem brought along, probably by a familiar, or another party member would be fine as well. And then what will happen is every time an enemy that is a humanoid comes within 100 feet of you, you're going to try to possess it. And then if it makes its saving throw, then you will try to possess somebody else. But if it fails its saving throw, then you're going to take it over, and suddenly you have all your class features again. You can cast your spells. You have a reasonable amount of hit points, so now you are going to contribute again. And then you might just keep that body for as long as you want, until maybe a better body comes along. Because remember, let's say you've taken over an orc, and then a Githyanki comes along that looks a lot more powerful. You could return to the Magic Jar, returning the original orc to its body, and then you could attempt to possess the Githyanki. Now, the thing I like about Magic Jar is it just keeps on working, right? Until it's dispelled or the container is destroyed. You can just do it over and over again. You can possess a creature, then you can possess another creature, and once you've possessed a creature, you can just stay in that creature. So Magic Jar is just one of those spells that just keeps on working. You cast it once, and years, even centuries later, it could still be working. It's essentially immortality. And again, as a DM, that makes Magic Jar a really good spell for DMs as well, for introducing enemies to the party that are maybe long dead wizards trapped in a magic jar that can possess party members or possess other humanoids. And the party may not even know what's going on for a while. There's stories that can be done entirely around the use of a magic jar spell. Mysteries that could be very difficult to solve and create interesting and unusual challenges for the party. So that's how the magic jar spell works. Now let's have some fun and talk about some theory and some outlandish stuff, and stuff that you should never actually do in gameplay, but it's fun to think about. So first, let's take a look. Here's our ancient gold dragon. We know that ancient gold dragons are one of the most powerful creatures in the entire game. Challenge rating of 24. Now, one of the features of the ancient gold dragon is it can change shape, and it can take the form of a humanoid. Now, I just want to mention that if a gold dragon was to take the form of a humanoid, it would technically be applicable for the magic jar spell. Now, having it actually work on the ancient gold dragon is another matter. The gold dragons have a legendary resistance, never mind the fact that they have a great charisma saving throw to begin with. But just in theory, a ancient gold dragon in humanoid form would technically be applicable for a magic jar spell. And if you were to possess that ancient gold dragon, you would then get the statistics of an ancient gold dragon, which means you could then change shape back into a dragon, and you would be a dragon permanently, except you would also be a wizard. And again, if we're to read the rules completely by raw, then you would even get the legendary actions of the dragon. And you would get more than 546 hit points, because you would also be adding your own hit dice as well, with a base constitution modifier of +9. And since we're just talking about theory, let's talk about another guy. Let's talk about Orcus. This is just one possible example, but if you were to cast, say, a true polymorph on Orcus, let's say you have a simulacrum, and that simulacrum casts true polymorph on Orcus, and somehow you get it to stick. Again, you would have to burn through legendary resistances, and then you would have to deal with wisdom saving throw of +13, but let's say your simulacrum succeeds on a true polymorph against Orcus. So what would you do with Orcus? Well, you would turn him into a kobold. Now he has a charisma saving throw of -1. Then what happens? Well, then you hit him with the magic jar, and then you have possessed the kobold, and then your simulacrum would drop the concentration on the true polymorph, and then you're Orcus, except you're also a high-level spellcaster. Again, that would last until it's dispelled. So you would potentially become Orcus, except also a high-level wizard, forever. Since we're talking about potentially broken stuff, let's talk about Death Ward. Now, again, I'm not 100% sure this one works within Raw. I think it's a little bit vague, but I want to talk about it anyway, because I think it's a fun thought in theory, and we're exploring those things. So let's say for a moment we've possessed Orcus. Well, what's the biggest concern? Well, the biggest concern is, of course, that we have a Dispel Magic cast on us. We have a Dispel Magic cast, and suddenly Orcus is back in his own body, and he's probably going to be upset. But let's say for a moment that after possessing Orcus, one of your party members casts a Death Ward on you. And then let's just say that you take your original body and you move it far away, or you kill it, or whatever. You get rid of that body. Well, if the container is destroyed or the spell ends, your soul immediately returns to your body. But if your body is more than 100 feet away from you, or the body is dead when you attempt to return to it, you die. If another creature's soul is within the container when it's destroyed, the creature's soul returns to its body if the body is alive and within 100 feet. Otherwise, the creature dies. So let's say for a moment that our body is more than 100 feet away from the container, and the container is more than 100 feet away from us as Orcus, and then we are to have the container destroyed. Well, according to this, Orcus would immediately die, and we would immediately die. But a Death Ward works like this. If a spell is still in effect when the target is subjected to an effect that would kill it instantly without dealing damage, that effect is instead negated against the target, and the spell ends. So we can't return to our own body, we can't return to the container, so instead we die, except the death ward keeps us from dying. So did we just become a permanent Orcus? I think that is up for debate. We can take a look at the magic jar spell wording very closely, and I think it is certainly debatable whether you would remain in Orcus's body if you attempted that trick. Because again, if we read it really carefully, if the container is destroyed or the spell ends, your soul immediately returns to your body. That's the first thing it says. So your soul's technically probably already left Orcus. And then if your body is more than 100 feet away from you, or if your body is dead when you attempt to return to it, you die. So if we're not in Orcus's body and we don't die, I don't know, maybe we become a ghost or something. Anyway, if we're talking about theory, that's definitely one I find pretty interesting. The final thing I want to mention too is remember that, again, if you use Magic Jar and you take over a creature, you don't want it to die. You just never want it to die. But if you are in a situation where the creature dies, you're making a charisma saving throw, and I should point out that if you take a bard and you use magical secrets to take Magic Jar, you're going to have a significantly better saving throw than a wizard would have. So that is one advantage a bard would have. Now again, if I'm playing a character that's using Magic Jar, whether I'm a bard or a wizard or what, there's no way I'm going to remain in a creature if I am thinking it is close to dying. So that's the Magic Jar spell. Not an easy spell to understand, but I definitely think one of the most interesting spells in the entire game of D&D. And when I am a wizard and I get my 6th level spells, I often take Magic Jar. And if I don't take Magic Jar, I pretty much always consider taking Magic Jar, just because it is such a cool and interesting spell. So if you have any questions about the Magic Jar spell, leave them in the comment section down below. I'll answer as many as I can. And otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, Optimancers, and I'll see you next time.